Toolbox training. We're going to have a great series of presentations on how to reduce urban heat island effect with strategies in cool pavement and urban forestry. And we're going to have some great presentations first, we're going to be featuring Greg Spots, Assistant Director of Los Angeles Bureau of Street Services. He's going to be talking about cool pavement. And next, we're going to be hearing from Elizabeth Skurzat on developing LA's urban forest management plan, and she's the Director of City Plants. And finally, we're going to hear from Jessica Satoris, the Environmental Conservation Supervisor from City of Colton, on their tree management master plan. And so for questions, we're going to be having everyone type their questions into the chat box. And you can type your question in whenever you feel inspired to do so. And then at the end of everyone's presentations, I'll be moderating the questions and reading them to the group. And so without further ado, let's get started with Greg's Spots. Okay, take it away.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Greg Spots. I'm Assistant Director and Chief Sustainability Officer of the Los Angeles Bureau of Street Services. We're the agency that takes care of the road surface and sidewalks and street trees in the city of Los Angeles. I oversee several divisions, including street maintenance, and greetings to them. I think they're watching right now from our conference room, and urban forestry and investigation and enforcement. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about some of the urban cooling initiatives that we're pursuing in conjunction with some other city departments. Why is urban cooling important? The core idea is the heat island effect, that cities are hotter than the surrounding countryside because the built environment, the concrete and steel and asphalt that we put in absorbs heat from the sun more than what the regular landscape would. So here's just a kind of a conceptual graph showing how, you know, the more built up the area is, the warmer it is compared to the outlying areas. One of the interesting things about urban cooling is it's not just about reduced carbon emissions from reducing air conditioning usage. It also has to do with life and death. LA experiences heat-related illnesses and deaths, and we're one of the only cities in the United States that has heat-related deaths in the winter. We can have a warm spell in January, not this January, we didn't, but we can have a warm spell that catches people by surprise. It gets up to 95 degrees, and vulnerable populations such as the elderly or other people with certain health conditions aren't prepared. And so as LA warms, we're at risk of an increase of heat-related deaths. And LA is expected to get quite a bit warmer. Here's a list of some neighborhoods in LA. And the orange bar shows us the number of days per year with a temperature exceeding 95 degrees. And you can see we have some very hot areas of the city, particularly in the San Fernando Valley. Porter Ranch already has 55 days exceeding 95 degrees, and Sylmar has 54. And as you can see, that's expected to almost double in the 2041 to 2016 timeframe. So we're talking about, you know, a future environment for the city where maybe a third of the days of the year are 95 degrees and above in our hottest neighborhoods. There's a number of strategies that you can use to reduce the heat island effect, and three of them that are very important are shade trees, both on public property and private property. Cool roofs, which is are different types of roofing where instead of the building absorbing the sun's heat, it reflects some of that back as light into the atmosphere. And cool pavement, which is the topic we're going to explore today. So here's an infrared photograph that shows you that black asphalt absorbs quite a bit more heat than lighter colored surfaces and other materials. You can see if you compare the photograph to the infrared, The hottest areas that are colored in red correspond to the black asphalt areas in the smaller photo. What we wanted to do was explore whether some type of lighter colored paving surface would reduce the amount of heat capture by the roadway. And when we started this process, we couldn't find a single example of a public street in California that had received any kind of cool pavement treatment. The only cool pavement treatments we could find were in off-street parking for commercial office buildings that were seeking LEED points, were seeking sustainability points. So we set out to see if we could be the first municipality in California to put a cool pavement coating on a public street. But before we did that, we wanted to make sure that it was safe. So we went looking for a vendor, and we found a vendor called Guard Top that had a product called Cool Seal. It's interesting, they had a thin sealant that they made in about a half a dozen colors, and they were often selling it for use on school playgrounds. So there's an asphalt playground in a school, and you can make the basketball court look more appealing by painting it in different colors. And they found that the gray color among the various colors they had actually had a cooling effect, and they started marketing it as a cool pavement coating, but they hadn't yet put it on a public street. We're lucky in the city of LA, we're large enough, we have our own materials testing lab operated by one of our sister departments, the General Services Department. So we had the lab test the material, and it passed the wet traction tests and some basic durability tests. So we felt confident enough to try to put it on an off-street parking location, which was the parking lot at the Balboa Sports Complex, which is one of our parks in the San Fernando Valley. So we partnered with the Recreation and Parks Department, and this happened in July of 2015. So you can see here that it's basically a two-person job. In this case, they brought the material in a tank that's trailed by that truck there in the center of the photo, and then spread two different coats with squeegees. And then they put the striping back on top afterwards. And we found that both in the lab and in this field test, the material passed the wet traction tests for vehicles and for walking. And also that in summer afternoons, the coated area was approximately 10 Fahrenheit degrees cooler than untreated black asphalt across the median. We like this particular location because that median in the middle sort of made sure there wasn't a heat transfer across the asphalt from the coated area on the right to the uncoated on the left. So we thought 10 degrees was pretty good. One of the things we noticed is the temperature differential kept growing as the day went on. So on a hot summer day, the temperature differential would go from 1 degrees to 3 degrees to 5 degrees to 8 degrees to 10 and even 12 degrees as you got into the 3 or 4 o'clock hour. And that could turn out to be significant because people come home from work around 5 or 6 o'clock in the summer, and all the hardscape around their home has absorbed all this heat. And then that heat starts to dissipate into the evening. So right when they want to cool down their house, all the hardscape around their house is giving off heat at that time. So this is something that might mitigate that. So our next step was to go to the mayor and council and obtain some funding to actually do a pilot project on city streets. And we got about $150,000 worth of funding, which was enough to coat one city block in each of the 15 council districts that comprise Los Angeles. So here you can see city workers from street services applying the material. Basically, the vendor would bring it out in that tanker, and then we would spread it in 2 coats. And we had a chance to do this all over the city in different kinds of neighborhoods and different microclimates. And indeed, as we went out on the public street, we continued to find about a 10 degrees temperature difference, which is very good. This is one of my tweets at the time, showing everybody the actual infrared gun readings here. You can see in this particular visit, the coated area here on Coronado Street was about 134.9 degrees Fahrenheit, and the uncoated was 148. And we think that's significant. So did the press. We were really surprised to see sort of national and international coverage. We were covered in the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post. And then Agence France Presse came out, which is the French, what do you call that? It's like the Associated Press in France. And they shot a video, and then that caused us to get stories and videos in 10 different languages. We received a lot of inquiries from cities in the United States and from Australia, New Zealand, and Europe. One of the things everyone was asking us, and we were interested in too, is concerns about staining or darkening. The public street is a very dirty and harsh environment, and anytime you put a lighter color out there, it's going to show stains. And we were wondering whether the neighbors would be concerned by that staining, and also wondering whether, if the material darkened, did the temperature differential start to reduce over time. And we did find that in some of our locations, 1 year later, when we got to the second summer, the temperature differential had decreased by a few degrees in the locations that had darkened up the most. And so the vendor decided that they would reapply the material in some of the locations with a slightly revised formulation. So they went back over the winter, came up with a formulation they thought would stand up to both, the material being abraded or eroded off, and also to stains. And they gave us a warranty repair at no charge to the city in these locations. Interestingly, they applied it differently than we did. They did the first coat with a slurry buggy, which is a little motorized rig you can see in the left. And they sprayed on the first coat with that. And then they did the second one with a hand spray. And this may be a more cost-effective way to apply it at scale. And you do avoid any sort of marks from the squeegee by doing it this way. So we have several different next steps we're pursuing at the same time. We took our learnings from this project and we applied for a new urban cooling planning grant through SB1, and we won that grant. And so we've engaged a consultant to begin a community-driven process to identify a multifaceted urban cooling project around the Sherman Way station for the Metro Orange Line, which is the busway, the express busway in the valley. This is a very hot area of town. We collaborated with Councilmember Blumenfield, and the community is going to tell us, what they think they need to be able to bike or walk to that transit stop without getting too hot. So that may involve cool surfaces, cool roofs, shade structures, any number of things. The grant will enable us to fund the planning, but then we'll have to go seek funding for implementation. Another next step we're in the middle of is we partnered with the LA Clean Tech Incubator at the La Kretz Innovation Campus in the Arts District in downtown LA. And currently there's 4 different products being installed on the parking lot to see how those products work out. So we're hopeful that we may identify additional products we might want to try on the public street through this partnership with the non-for-profit here, who did a call for products to turn us on to some additional products beyond the first one we used. And then we're getting ready in late spring to do our first neighborhood level urban cooling project, where we coat all the streets in a small subdivision. So say we coat 10 to 15 city blocks, all contiguous, and maybe we might see a neighborhood level cooling effect that would be more substantial than just coating one city block in each council district. So those are the next steps that we're taking. And another one that's under consideration, but a little beyond the scope of our department, is Metro is planning a long asphalt bike and pedestrian path on what used to be railroad tracks along Slauson Avenue in South LA. It's called Rail to River. And there's some discussion about the possibility of coating that bike and pedestrian path with cool pavement coating. And that could be very nice because it could actually make the path more livable and enjoyable for pedestrians and cyclists on hot summer days. By the way, here at Street Services, we're here to help. We have a terrific app called MyLA 311 that you can get on iPhone or Android. It's the fastest way to call in a pothole or a tree emergency. So we'd love to hear from you. Let us know where the areas are out there that we need to do some work. And thank you very much for having me on the webinar.
All right, thanks, Greg. Next, we're going to be hearing from Liz Skurzet. So please bear with me while I change the screen. Okay. Okay, great. Thanks, Liz. You're good to go.
Awesome. Thank you, India. Thanks, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Skurzat, and I'm the Executive Director of City Plants, which is a nonprofit started by the City of Los Angeles that works hand in hand with the city to plant and distribute 20,000 trees a year in LA. And today we'll be talking about an urban forestry management plan, what it is, why you should have one, how you can go about doing one, and a little bit about how we started doing one in Los Angeles. So the first question, so I should say with a little bit of background, City Plants had the opportunity about 18 months ago to apply for a grant to do the assessment phase of an urban forestry management plan for Los Angeles. And thanks to our partners at the city, we were able to do that and to complete the assessment phase, which was completed in December. And it's currently on our website, which is cityplants.org. And it's really just the first step in a full urban forestry management plan. So the full thing hasn't been completed yet, but it's an excellent start. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what a UFMP is and why you should consider having one, particularly for urban cooling. So one thing that Greg talked about was that shade trees are important for urban cooling. Having a healthy urban canopy is something that a UFMP will help you achieve. So if you're able to achieve a healthy urban canopy with a UFMP, you're ahead of the game. So an urban forestry management plan is a roadmap for a shared vision of your city's urban forest. And it allows your city to proactively manage your tree population for maximum benefits. And essentially, the simple way of talking about it is that it's about getting everyone who touches trees in your city in the same boat, rowing in the same direction towards the same goal. And that is really the main thing that this document does. So it can include budgets, inventories, schedules, policies, standards, a roadmap for public education, ordinances, and obviously you want to state your goals. So who's in the boat rowing? Everyone who touches trees in your city. So you want to have street trees, the people who take care of street trees in your city and in Los Angeles. That's the Bureau of Street Services, Urban Forestry Division. You want everyone who touches park trees in your city, which in Los Angeles is the Department of Recreation and Parks. You want to have your planning department in the city, and this is particularly important because most cities, the bulk of the urban forest or the bulk of the canopy, 90% of it, is actually on private property. So having your planning department on board with an urban forestry management plan is truly crucial. And their role is protecting old trees and planting new trees when development goes through. And then you need your Bureau of Engineering, or your engineering, and that in Los Angeles is the Bureau of Engineering, and they obviously have standards. And you also need to have your politicians on board because they decide the budget and the policy for trees in the city. And one very important, sometimes overlooked aspect is your nonprofit and community organizations. You want to bring them in at the very beginning because they can either advance your project or stop it right in its tracks through advocacy. So an urban forestry management plan answers three basic questions. The first is, where are we now? What's the current condition of the urban forest? The second is, where do we want to be? What do we want our urban forest to look like in the future? And the third is, how do we get there? What budget, policies, planning strategies do we need to have in place to get from where we are to where we want to be? And that's it. That is the full breadth of what a UFMP will answer for your city. So if you were to start from scratch with an urban forest management plan, there is a very helpful toolkit that is available online. I would just Google Urban Forest Management Plan Toolkit because the website is actually rather long. And it was created by the Inland Urban Forest Council, which is a member of the California Urban Forest Council, which is a statewide organization. And the toolkit was funded by a joint grant between CAL FIRE and the U.S. Forest Service. So much like CAL FIRE and the U.S. Forest Service actually funded the assessment phase for Los Angeles, it funded the creation of this toolkit for any city really in the United States or around the world to be able to come and figure out how to go about creating a UFMP for them. And these are the main guiding questions that you'll find on that website. And so, there are three phases to doing a UFMP: pre-planning, the development of the actual UFMP, and post-planning or adaptive management. So in Los Angeles, when we wrote the grant to get the money to do the assessment phase, we actually did a lot of the pre-planning. So, you have to answer the questions: why do you need to develop a plan? Who are the people whose support you need? Where's the geographical limits? We decided on the city's limits. What areas or trees will be addressed: street trees, park trees, etc. And then, how long should the plan cover, and how are we going to pay for it? But when you get to the UFMP itself, again, you really have those three questions: the vision, what do you want? The inventory and assessment is, what do you have? And the strategic plan is, how do you get there? And then later on, you have implementation and monitoring plan, which is, well, now that we've adopted this and we've set our UFMP in motion, are we reaching our goals, and do we need to change the way that we do things to better reach them? So this is part of the pre-planning. And it's really important to consider these four questions in the inventory and assessment phase. So the context that you need to explore as part of the inventory and assessment phase is, what's the history of urban forestry in your city, and what is the environment like? So, for most of Southern California, we are in a Mediterranean climate. How does that impact how we manage our trees? And then you want to look at your vegetation. So you want to look at canopy cover and the trees themselves. And the trees themselves usually means an inventory. And you actually really need a full, professionally done inventory in order to complete an urban forestry management plan. And then you have management. So you need to describe who has responsibility for what parts of your trees, and then your plans, policies, and regulations for those trees, and the current practices on the ground. And then you also, again, really need to consider the community. What are the community's values, and what issues do they have with how trees are currently managed in your city? And then the next part is the scope. So this is where you decide, what are you going to concentrate on? So first is geographic limits. Is it going to be the city? It mostly makes sense for it to be the city boundaries. But some people do UFMPs for neighborhoods. Some people do them for university campuses. So it doesn't just need to be cities. And then you want to look at, are you going to do it just for street trees, just for park trees? The city of Paris actually has a whole thing on heritage trees that is rather interesting. Or you could look at facility trees. So what about trees that are just on school grounds or just on your libraries or your city facilities? Are you going to look at parking lots? Stuff like that. So it's really important to define the scope before you move on. And then there's I wouldn't call it a simple or easy, 5-step process for going about doing an urban forestry management plan from scratch. So first, you want to establish your partnerships and define that scope, write the scope of work. The second, and this is very important, it is absolutely imperative to hire an outside consultant. It's so important to bring in someone, a company or an organization with established credibility in urban forestry management to assess from the outside, because that helps bring in a certain gravitas, and then it's not you arguing for more money for your department. It's an outsider doing an impartial assessment, and that's hugely important. Step 3 is to form and grow a formal working group. And then once you have those in place, you can write the plan. And once the plan is written and reviewed, it's very important to have your city council adopt the plan so that it has teeth. So this is what we did in Los Angeles. This is the beginning of the partnership that went out after the grant for the assessment phase. So the U.S. Forest Service and CAL FIRE provided the funding, or provided the opportunity to apply for the grant. And City Plants reached out to the mayor's office, Mayor Eric Garcetti's office, the LA Board of Public Works, Rec and Parks, and Bureau of Street Services with the opportunity. And they were very excited about it and pledged staff time to help. And then we also spoke with the nonprofit partners that plant trees with our program, which was the Koreatown Youth and Community Center, Los Angeles Beautification Team, LA Conservation Corps, Northeast Trees, Tree People, and a Cleaner, Greener East LA. And they all also pledged staff time to help with this project. And so we had a really great partnership from the very beginning, applying for this grant. And I think that's one of the reasons that we were able to get it. And then once we got the funds, we went about hiring a consultant. So we created a review committee that was basically made up of those original partnerships. Having a review committee is really important, and it's very important to include the wide swath of people that you want to support the end product. So not just the organizing agency, but include representatives from your mayor or council, all of the people who touch trees in your city, park, street, and planning, and then your nonprofit community orgs, maybe even a community rep. Looking at your tree board is a great idea. In Los Angeles, it's called the Community Forestry Advisory Committee, or CFAC, but different cities call them different things. And of course, it's always polite to include your funding agencies as members of your review committee. And we chose Dudek. We had a really competitive process, and Dudek had a fabulous presentation and a fabulous interview, and they were really quite wonderful. They're an environmental consultant agency out of Pasadena, and they were with us every step of the way. So once things got underway, we had a much larger formal working group, and it kept growing, which was very cool. When people around the city hall or around the community found out what we were doing, we got numerous requests to join the working group, which was really exciting. And so what we ended up with was the mayor's office, council offices, of course, Recreation and Parks, BSS, the planning department, LADWP, several nonprofit and community organizations, CFAC came, and then obviously the funders. And so our original small group grew to this, which was a number of nonprofits and several more city bureaus and departments joining in. And we met once a month for 10 months to discuss problems that we face in urban forestry, potential solutions, and different aspects of how the urban forest could be improved. And the consultants actually found it really helpful because they were able to plumb the knowledge of the group as a whole. And it was also helpful on the back end because once the plan, or once the assessment was written, there was a built-in group of people who supported it. And I can, it's especially important to have people from the community part of the working group, because you could either hear their opinions while you're writing it, or you could hear their opinions after it's written. And it's much better to hear their opinions while you're writing it and then have them support it rather than have them criticize it after the fact. And actually what happened in Los Angeles, which was very cool, is some of these nonprofits got together after it was written and went to each city council office and to the mayor's office and argued in support of it, adopting it, and continuing to write the full plan. So I would definitely consider the working group to be a key to being successful. And then this was the plan. So this is, the plan is available, well, the assessment is available on our website, cityplants.org. It does take a while to download because it's a rather large file. And it basically is a full assessment of all of the forestry practices, policies, and budgets in Los Angeles. And here are some of the key findings. We did a comparative city study, and I have to say, this was an idea that was brought forth by the mayor's office, and it took a lot of political courage and I think a lot of wisdom to take a hard look at how Los Angeles manages its urban forest in comparison with leadership cities across the country, and actually one in Australia. And this got probably the most press out of the entire assessment. And what people focused on was the per tree spending. So New York and San Francisco spend over $70 per tree every year. The city of Melbourne, which is quite small in Australia, spends over $60 per tree. And the city of Los Angeles spends between $25 and $30 per tree. So that's a huge difference. And it created a great deal of press. And then the consultant looked at street tree trim cycles and actually took this from a BSS State of the Street Trees report. It was really helpful to put it in the overall assessment so that it shows politicians and people in charge of the budget in one place where best management practices are, which is the orange line. You want to trim your trees every 5 to 7 years. And then how the trim cycle has been funded. And you can see city before the recession was mostly hitting the mark. And then once the recession hit, it went way off the charts, and it's starting to recover, but it's still nowhere close to the mark. So it really helped change the conversation in Los Angeles about how our street trees are funded and what the city should be spending to reach best management practices and industry standards. And then we have the budget gap, and this got a lot of press too. And you really want to look at the total budget per year. It's the bottom right corner. And these are for recreation and parks, our park trees. The gap to sustainability, the city should be spending $13 million more per year on our park trees to manage them sustainably. And then with street trees, the gap to sustainability is $43 million. So those are really large numbers, and they got a great deal of attention, but it did fundamentally change the conversation in City Hall about how we need to fund our trees for the future so that we can achieve that cooler city. And then the consultant also proposed a governance structure. And the way that I see it, or the way that I look at it, is this is who needs to be on the boat and where they should be assigned on the boat and how we can all row together in the same direction. So it talks about CFAC, which is the tree board, our utility, LADWP, the Board of Public Works, Mayor and City Council, Bureau of Street Services, Planning, and Rec and Parks, and how they should each touch, how they should each trees. And then it also recommended that the city hire an urban forestry coordinator to look out just after trees themselves amidst all of those groups, which the city's in the process of doing. And then step 5 is adopting the plan. And this is a really important part of the process. Essentially, if you don't have the council adopt the plan, once it's created, the plan will never have any teeth. So for Los Angeles, again, we just did the assessment phase. So there's really nothing for the city council to adopt because we're still in the process of writing the plan. But if, you know, with a much smaller city, it probably wouldn't take as long. And it's very, very important that once it's written, it's given teeth and it's given that, that official blessing. And this is also, again, where having that working group that includes community members is so important, because those community members can be pushing to support your plan to be adopted, rather than either being neutral or worse, trying to stop it from being adopted in the first place. And I always like to end with this slide, which is a picture of a little girl named Juliet, who was 3 years old when this was taken, and she lives in Boyle Heights. And I always stop on this slide to remind everybody that we don't do this work for trees themselves. We do this work for the people who live in our communities, and in particular, for the kids who live in our communities, because trees are a long-term investment. And we want to make sure that the city that we hand our children is as green and cool and livable as the city that we inherited from our parents. So we don't pay for trees to take care of trees. We pay for trees to take care of people. And that's really why you should consider doing an urban forestry management plan, to look after the future of your community. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much, Liz. And next, we're going to be hearing from Jessica Satoris of City of Colton about their street tree management plan.
Thank you. All right. Like I was just introduced, my name is Jessica Satoris, and I'm going to share a little bit of a different perspective. City of Colton is an inland empire city, so it is only about 16 square miles, population 52,000. So this is an urban forestry management plan that we have already adopted that we did for our situation, just being a small disadvantaged community. Just like LA, we were able to get funding for an urban forestry management plan through the California Climate Investment, through CAL FIRE. And it was a project that we worked collaboratively with in my division, which is all our sustainability programs. I oversee water conservation, GHG mitigation, and energy efficiency programs through our electric utility. So the vision for Colton's urban forestry management plan began when a couple years ago, the governor made an executive order that cities, counties, and state agencies could no longer water grass medians. In the city of Colton, at the time, that was a large standing order because all of our irrigation was set up really to water grass with trees planted in the middle of them in medians. They shut off the water and several of our trees died pretty quickly. It was in the midst of the drought, and we started seeing a quick decline. So that's the main reason of my goal to write the grant to get an urban forestry management plan. And I want to reiterate what was just said. It's so important for a community. And for us, it was more of an urgency because of what had happened to our entire city landscape, from turning off the water during that drought period. And when you have a city that's as old as mine, and we're about 125 plus years, you have a very old urban forest. So when you shut off water like that, the trees have already kind of lived their full healthy life cycle and are vulnerable to pests and diseases as well. So that was the main urgency for the plan. And the vision that we had was to develop an urban forest sustainable and resilient with a mix of healthy trees and a planting plan that would develop different ages throughout the city, so you won't have a situation like we were in where every tree is the same age and slowly dying off at the same time. Colton has a lot of benefits to gain for planting trees. One thing that we experienced during that drought time was a lot of our residents in older neighborhoods had parkways. And although that isn't a planning design that you typically have now in new urban tracts, but we do here in Colton, and they were trying to tear out the grass that was in their parkways and their trees and concrete them in. So at the same time where we're trying to battle being a disadvantaged community, we have 180 trains that come through Colton. And we're mitigating all these things trying, and our residents didn't really have a clue what they were doing to save water on their end was impacting our entire community and making it just beautification. So that was one of the benefits, was beautifying the communities, even though it does provide the reduction of heat islands effects, pathways for children to walk to school, more healthier environments. We didn't realize what a effect from one thing led to the other in this drastic plan. So once we went through this whole process of the urban forestry management plan, doing the community outreach, it was very evident that our residents didn't know the benefits for trees. So that's when we, went out to talk to the residents to let them understand what we're doing by taking out all these trees and hardscaping everything, where we're now doing the opposite of what our goal is and reducing our emissions. So that was one of the things that we went out and educated our community on, that's listed here. This is the result of Colton's tree assessment when they did the inventory, and it was pretty alarming to me, and I knew that it was bad was when we were at a 6% tree canopy, and no city wants to be at 6%. We want to be at 30, 40%. And at the pace at 6%, you actually, with climate change, our consultant was saying, we're actually changing our entire environment to desert climate within the next 90 to 100 years. And that was another reason why it became of an urgent to have a plan and amend our ordinances to protect our trees. Air quality, as mentioned, is a problem. We have some of the worst, highest levels of ozone in all of the Inland Empire. In our disadvantaged community score, we're like 90th percentile per Cal EPA EnviroSpeed score. And these were the results and benefits that give a value to how much reduction of emissions you're doing and the dollar value. So that was something when we took it to council to get adopted, we had a lot of support for, because we know that we have high levels of ozone, we know that we have high levels of pollutants and asthma, and our job, was to mitigate all those things and find that value in the trees and the cost that you want to budget for to maintain your forest. Another thing about tree selection, in the past, there was really no diversity in tree selection. There would be parkways and medians where they'd have all the same species of tree, and there really wasn't any consideration for the hardiness, the tree height, the canopy, the location, to make sure that you have a diverse tree selection so that you don't have insect and pathogen resistant. So if one tree gets sick, you'll have a whole street line of trees die off and get sick. And that was one thing, again, we didn't think about, but now we won't have that problem. So whenever we look and review plans, we make sure that there is a diverse landscape for any new development coming in that is doing street trees, and have a criteria so we don't make the same mistake twice. As mentioned before, it's so important to engage the community. It's not just the residents, it's the business community as well. A lot of our street trees are in front of businesses, and when they are healthy and providing a nice canopy, more people will be attracted to their business. So we wanted to make sure we had these 7 important value to our community when we were meeting and engaging them. And it's thriving, protecting, nurturing, connect, be resilient, be diverse, and show value for trees that are selected. Then it's also important to align it with your general plan and ordinance. That was very important. We put in restrictions, require a certain amount of hardscape versus landscape. A lot of customers with our water conservation programs that I managed thought this was a time where it was, let's just take out any type of permeable surface and make it all rock or all concrete, and that we didn't want to see that. So we actually amended things to protect the residences, to keep value to their home, to stop the heat island effect by making sure they don't just take out all their landscaping and put in rock. We also wanted to augment Colton's cleaner, greener community initiatives. We have a lot of initiatives already in play with advancing our EV program for electric vehicles, curbside charging, multifamily low-income curbside charging, and rebates that will actually be launching here soon. Everything with the same mindset to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions in our city and slowing down that heat island effect. So the final community summary recommendations from our urban forestry management plan was obviously to increase the number of trees that we currently have so that we can reach that 30%. Make sure that all our trees are diverse and are maintained. We have a special program now to plant for free trees that have been dead or died off in parkways for our residents, as long as they sign a commitment that they will maintain that tree. And that was important to us as well. Also, having our own electric utility, just like LA, we wanted to make sure the selection of trees were specific to where our power lines were, so that you don't have the hacking of trees when they do maintenance on the power lines. We want to make sure that we're planting the correct trees under the correct areas that reach the heights that won't impact our power lines. And lastly, we want to continue to engage our community and continually do, we'd love to do unity and community planting events. We've already done 2 in areas that were lacking trees, and we partnered with nonprofits like the Incredible Edible Community Garden, who had several trees that they could provide us to plant throughout Colton. Since we started this project, we've planted over 450 trees over the last 2 years, which may not seem very much, but for a city this size, that was a very good accomplishment for us to do. These are, Jackson Associates was the author of Urban Forestry Management Plan. Loyola Marymount University students were the ones that helped do the inventory, and Guy Stivers was our arborist that was hired through our contract, and urban forester. And one nice thing about the project, even till today, because they have to maintain, part of our grant was to actually plant trees. We planted 111 trees, and they are coming out to reiterate all the ANSI standards on proper tree care and maintenance for our park staff. That concludes my presentation, and here's my contact information if you guys have any further questions.
All right, thank you, Jessica. Let me pull up this. So now we have time for questions. Please type your question into the chat box. We already have one question. Hold on, let me pull it up. So Rich has asked for Greg Spots, which method of heat island reduction is the most efficient based on impact versus cost? And Greg, you can press the little button.
Good question. and it's complex, and we're not sure yet. Taking these things to scale is sort of the next challenge. I think what we're all facing in, climate change is we need to make big changes a lot faster than we're used to making big changes. The only one that we've taken to scale yet is the cool roofs. And the way we did it is LA first had an incentive to get a little rebate when you used a cool roofing product. But then we came and we changed the building code and we required it. And there's actually been tens of millions of square feet of cool roofs installed in LA since we changed the building code. And, anytime you do something like this, everyone says, oh, it's going to cost so much money. But actually, LA is so large that the manufacturers were able to really have a whole variety of different types of roofing products be certified as cool at a very low incremental additional cost. Planting shade trees at scale is hard because they take years to grow, unless you want to buy mature trees, which are really expensive. So that's a challenge. And, we're not yet sure if coating the pavement in itself is cost effective to do at a very large scale. And that's the reason why we want to do a few of these neighborhood level projects to see if we get an even better cooling effect when all the streets in that one neighborhood are coated that way.
All right, thank you. If anyone else has any more questions, I'll give you a moment or two to type them in. All right, looks like it's a quiet bunch today. You can always email me any more questions that you have, and I can direct them to the speakers. And before we close out, I wanted to let everyone know that tomorrow we're going to be hosting our Natural and Farmlands Working Group, and they are the working group of stakeholders that help us with conservation strategies for our Regional Transportation Plan Sustainable Community Strategy. We're actually at capacity in person tomorrow, but we still invite people to log in and participate via webinar. You can email me at brookover@scag.ca.gov to participate online. And also, this webinar recording and all the presentations will be available for download at the address here, sustain.scag.ca.gov. I'll also be emailing this link. It's kind of long to everyone who registered for the webinar. And that's it. Thank you all for participating. Thank you to our speakers. Okay.
Thanks a lot. All right.